Hello, welcome back to It's Hard to Talk About It. My name is Yael Bat-Shimon. And today will be the 5th episode of this podcast. In the first 4 episodes, I kind of tried to lay the groundwork with some basic concepts, some basic frameworks that have helped me in my own understanding of my own whiteness in general, and white supremacy, systemic racism. Today, I want to bring it into the present more. And if I think back about why I really wanted to do this podcast, I felt this real sense of urgency after our last presidential election. When the results came in, I was shocked, even though I don't think I should have been shocked. Everything I know about this country tells me that I shouldn't be shocked. But I felt hopeful. I thought about Kamala Harris as our first Black female president, and I felt very excited. I felt a kind of, inspiration and hope. I felt like maybe we could go in some new direction. But I shouldn't have been surprised, as I say. What the people who support Trump, that whole entire movement, what they've been very successful at is mobilizing resentment, white resentment. They've been very successful at that. And they've been successful at taking advantage of white supremacy as it lives in us white folks and in the country and in many people of color as well. And using that to fuel hatred and violence and a desire to go back. And I think there's a longing in much of white America to return to those days of slavery, perhaps, for some people, but definitely of very clear white supremacy. And that despite the fact that there already is very clear white supremacy as we are today. So I felt a real longing and a calling to speak directly to white folks. I've had the privilege of having people of color, and particularly my wife, who's Black, speak to me with a lot of love and compassion in a way that I could really hear and begin to see my own complicity in white supremacy in ways that I really couldn't see before. And it's such an important journey. And I do think there's a longing side by side with that longing for much of white America to go back in time. I do think that there's just the beginnings of a longing in some white folks to move forward, to be able to have somebody as a president who's a Black woman. Now, at the same time, even if Kamala Harris had won this election, the same structures would be there. And the structures themselves are white supremacist structures. The institutions are white supremacist institutions. And again, when I say white supremacist, I don't mean Proud Boys, KKK. That's really not what I mean. I mean that this country is built in a racial hierarchy, around a racial hierarchy that puts white people at the top of the hierarchy, and that there are many ways that hierarchy is reinforced through our legal system, through our institutions. Really, the DEI efforts were just the tiniest bit of an effort to rectify some of that, embeddedness of white supremacy. It was really an effort to include, and I want to talk about that word include. Just that word include, I think, is a really problematic word, because if I think about inclusion, what that really is saying is that, okay, you folks of color, I'm going to include you in this white, in this all white field, institution, class, profession. Inclusion doesn't feel like a very exciting word to me. Equity does. Equity feels like a very important word to me. But we're very, very far away from it. So to come back to why I wanted to do this, institutions, professions, schools, churches, communities, things like Congress, Senate, all of these things are made up of people. All an institution is a bunch of people, plus the norms, the values, the rules, the structures that that group creates as a group of people, based also on what they've inherited from the way those things have worked in the past. And the reason that's important is that I, as an individual white person, am part of, let's say, for me, my profession. I'm part of my profession. I'm actually a therapist. And so I am part of a profession. And as an individual, I happen to be a white person who is part of a profession that is shot through with white supremacy, because it was founded by white folks. It was normed around white folks. The research was around white folks. It's through a white lens. The norm is considered to be a white person. And that's true of every profession in this country, and every institution. Every law that's made is made by a majority of white people in this country. So it's not enough to look at white supremacy out there and try to change it, because white supremacy lives within as well. And until I can see that as a white person, and I'm just speaking for white people, I know that people of color also have embedded white supremacy and have their own journey around that. But as a white person, my journey has to begin also inside, because if I don't start inside, I can't possibly see, I can't separate myself from it and begin to see that I don't know everything, that there are many voices that are excluded, that I can't hear. And this is a time when we desperately need other ideas. We need new ideas for this country. We need innovation. We need creativity. What we have been doing is not working. What we have been doing has led to this moment of just intense destruction of everything. And so it's really incumbent on each of us as white people to look at this clearly and say, what happened to us? White folks, what has happened to us? What has happened to us that more than half of our brothers and sisters and cousins and uncles and aunts and grandparents and children are so angry, are so deeply invested in white supremacy that they will blindly elect someone who is so clearly incapable, who is psychotic. And I think to answer that question, we have to look inside ourselves. How does that live in me? Because it does live in us, to whatever extent it does, and in whatever different ways it does. It does. We can't escape that it lives in us. And I think I've said before about these protests. I really appreciate the protests, and I've been going to them, and I'm keeping my eyes open. And a little bit, I'm starting to see some people. I'll put a sign up for you. One guy said, "Deport white supremacy." One said, "Underneath every white hood, as in the KKK, you'll see a red hat." But I still am afraid that as a whole, we might be missing the point in terms of saying that we have to impeach Trump. Yes, we do. Saying Elon Musk has got to go. I agree. Hegseth, a drunk as a Department of Defense minister, does not make sense. These are all affirmative action hires, affirmative action for white people. But again, I think that misses the deeper point, because we can get rid of all of them, but there will just be new ones that will pop up in their place, because the structures are not changed. The structures remain the same. And that's where I think white identity, we have to look inside at ourselves and really focus on dismantling white supremacy. So I wanted to read a little section to you. This was really a profound reading for me. And this is from David Mura. I'll put it in the comments. The stories whiteness tells itself, racial myths in our American narratives. There are a couple pieces I want to read to you. What you as an individual white person will have to undergo is a transformation of your identity. As James Baldwin told us, such changes involve a terror as primary as the nightmare of the mortal fall, as threatening as the knowledge of your own mortality. You will have to change the hierarchy in your mind concerning the way you see yourself in relation to people of color. You will have to change the way you look at yourself in relationship to others, both whites and people of color. You will have to transform the way you look at institutions, society, history, and almost any field of endeavor you can name. And then he goes on to say, and I think this is really important, I really want to share it with you, because what he's talking about next is the way that white people, the way that we tend to respond when there are any critiques made by people of color. And usually those critiques will be met with a response of denial, like, you're just playing the race card, you're being overly sensitive, this institution, organization isn't racist, I'm not racist, it can't be that bad. And he suggests another way, and if you could take one thing from today, I hope you would take this. Rarely will the person of color's mention of a racial issue ever be met with an open-ended inquiry by their white audience. For example, with a white person asking, "Please tell me, why do you think that? Why do you feel the way you're feeling?" Or, what is it I'm not seeing or understanding? What have I gotten wrong? I think this is incredibly important questions. That's part of a shift to humility from the white superiority thinking, I know best, that you, person of color, you just need to see it the way I see it. You're too sensitive, that kind of thing, that is a kind of knee-jerk reaction for so many of us, to really shifting to humility and curiosity, and acknowledging, just knowing, this is how I go about my life now. I know that I have blind spots, and that's normal. That's normal. I don't have to beat myself up for it. I don't have to feel bad about it. That's just, I was born in this country. I was raised as white, and so I have blind spots. That's how I've been conditioned. That's how I've been socialized. So if I can hold that knowledge that I have blind spots, there are many things I just cannot see, especially when it comes to race, then I can be open to really hearing, wow, what are you seeing? To a person of color, what are you seeing? Tell me why you see it that way. What does it feel like to you? And then I can actually learn from that. But he goes on, David Mura goes on to say something else, which I think is so important, about why we as white people tend to get so threatened when issues of race are raised. He says, for the white person at this point isn't thinking about the person of color, much less what the person of color actually means by what they are saying. Instead, the white person is responding to a sense of threat, a challenge to their sense of reality and their identity, to their sense of themselves. Such a threat must be blocked and cannot be considered. In the mind of this white person, there is no possibility of a valid, radical difference in the perception of reality. No possibility that the person of color might perceive something the white person has not. In the ideology of whiteness, white knowledge is always positioned as superior and valid. It is the knowledge that validates all other knowledge. Black knowledge, the knowledge of people of color and indigenous people, must always be suspect and subjective, must always wait for white approval for validity. That the white person in question doesn't see the racist premises of such a hierarchy of knowledge is part of the problem. I just think that explains it so beautifully. And, it's easier to see that knee-jerk, defensive, threatened position in other people. I think we can all acknowledge that, we can see it in MAGA, and, the Proud Boys, those outwardly white supremacist groups of people. But I think if we look closely, for sure, I can see it in myself. And it may take a slightly different form. To me, it looks more subtle. I can tell you for sure it doesn't land as subtle for people of color. I've experienced that. And I'm grateful that that's been brought to my attention. And that now I can be on a lookout for it for myself. So I think I'm going to leave it there. I guess what I'd like to leave you with in terms of questions for reflection, I think I'd just like to hear from you. What are your thoughts about what I read from David Mura? What are some of the knee-jerk responses that you make? What do you feel in your body when when a racial complaint, criticism, difference, acknowledgement of race at all comes up? What do you notice in your body? Do you notice a tightening? Do you notice your heart race a little bit? Do you notice a fight-flight response? Do you freeze? And at this moment in history, what do you think you personally, as a white person, can do to contribute to a different story, contribute to the dismantling of white supremacy? What is the first step for you? Or where are you on this journey? I really appreciate your listening. I appreciate your comments always. And I really would love to hear from you so that I can incorporate and have a more interactive and engaging podcast. Thanks.